Chapter 14. Brannon. 13 Lares, 577 AF. I cursed the rain as I trudged through it, wet and miserable and half-blind as icy droplets dripped from my hair into my eyes. Crissa was still as death, and my arms trembled and burned from her weight, my hands warm with her blood. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other as I stumbled along the muddy road, my face and feet growing cold and numb, the night black and unfriendly around us. I could not forget that awful moment when Rhys had shoved me from his path, unnaturally strong, his face emotionless as he had walked into the great room and plunged the dagger into our father's back. Father had screamed and fallen to the floor, trying to crawl away, though Lanya said that the blade had pierced his lung. Rhys had watched, apathetic, until our father had at last collapsed, and then turned his gaze on me. His eyes had been completely black. There was nothing human in them. All the color had been drained from them, consumed by that terrible darkness. The smell of charred earth had surrounded me, and I had recoiled, my stark terror bursting through my hands in blue flames and setting the house to blazing around us. Bright white light touched my mind, the pain of it piercing through my thoughts and bringing me back to the moment. I glanced at Rhys, nearly shuddering with relief to find his eyes normal once more. Our father is dead, Brannon. Our concern now must remain only for the living. I shook my head, pushing him out of it, and kept walking. The crone's house loomed before us at last, the windows lit from within like malevolent eyes. Lanya hurried ahead of us to knock, so that the rest of us arrived as the door opened. I had always hated the crone. She frightened me when I was small, her skin sallow and sunken so that her face resembled a death's head, except for the gleaming black of her eyes, which reminded me of shiny black beetles. But the nightmares she had given me as a child were nothing compared to the one she had forced us to live with for the last 8 years. I glared as she gazed at us, her face expressionless. "Do you have payment?" she asked at last. "Crissa's hurt," Lanya pleaded. "You have to help her." The crone's lips thinned. "I help no one without payment." I stepped forward, fury bubbling dangerously through my veins. "How about your life?" I asked, in what I thought to be a reasonable tone. Malice scraped at my bones. "You save our sister, and maybe I won't kill you for all the damage you've caused." The crone blanched, her calm shattered by my rage, and I shouldered past her into her house, the others crowding in behind me. She stared after us, remaining in the doorway, hesitant and muttering to herself. The table in the great room was completely covered in the detritus of the woman's trade. Bottles of all sizes, jars of powders and ointments, scraps of parchment, dried herbs and insects and things I didn't even want to begin to guess the nature of. Elixon, sensing my intention, cleared the surface of it with a sweep of his arm, sending the objects flying, many of them shattering as they hit the floor. The crone jerked, wanting to protest, but clearly afraid. I laid Crissa on her stomach upon the questionably clean surface, grimacing as I peeled my hand from her wounds. Her back looked even worse in the lurid light of the crone's fireplace, blood caked to her shirt, which hung from her in ragged strips. Even in sleep, which normally severed our connection, I could still feel her pain, beating against me like a fist. Where is Malachi?" the crone managed finally. I glanced at her. "He's dead." "Dead?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if she didn't understand. "He's dead?" "Yes." "How?" "We killed him." My voice was flat. She stared at me blankly. "Why?" "Why? Why?" I took 2 strides and grabbed the old woman by the neck, forcing her to look at my sister. "Why the hell do you think? You fed him those damn potions for years until there was nothing left. He nearly killed Chrissa tonight, and for what?" I shook her and shoved her toward the table, disgusted. "If you still want your damn payment, you're welcome to try to get it from him, but we've already paid enough for what you've done." She stood still for a moment, staring down at Chris's injuries, and then her head bowed in defeat. "You'll have to cut the shirt from her." Lanya knelt and picked up a long, slim knife from the debris littering the floor, using her skirts to clean it before beginning the task. The crone's expression grew pained as she saw the extent of the damage. "Did Malachi truly do this?" "Of course he did," Kylie snapped, speaking for the first time since we had left the farm. She still held Reese's kitten, Bandit, in her hands. "Who else but a monster would have done something like this?" "He's your father," she protested weakly. "You shouldn't speak of him that way." "I'll speak of him however I wish." Her chin jerked up, defiant. "And he wasn't our father. He hasn't been since our mother died." "You needed him. You were just children." "We haven't been children since Janice died," Elixir corrected her. Her shoulders slumped, as if weighed down by the hard stares aimed at her. "I was trying to help you. I thought he would at least be able to keep you all fed." "You should have just let him die," Reese said quietly. "It would have been better." I sat in a chair beside the table, listening to the others and trying to bottle my own hatred, watching as Lanya gently cut the shirt from Chris's back. Whatever the crone had done, I promised myself I would forgive her if she only saved my sister. Chrissa. I awoke to familiar agony, dim lights, and hushed, angry voices. I thought I almost recognized the shadows surrounding me, and I struggled to turn my head, peering groggily around the room. I was lying on my stomach, and every movement I made sent lances of fire racing down my tortured back. Cool hands touched my face, gentle but firm. Someone spoke calmly in female tones. I couldn't understand the words, but grasped their meaning. Lie still. I reached out toward my brother. "Brandon?" "Here." His brilliant red was muted with exhaustion. Pain threatened to drown me again at any moment. "Where?" "The crones. You're hurt. Others?" "Fine." Memory nudged me, something unclear, something I had seen before giving in to the pain. "Reese?" Hesitation. "The episode seems to be over." "Episode?" Confused, I tried again to move, and was held in place. "What?" "Later. You need to rest." The question hovered between us, dreadful and daunting, but I forced myself to ask. "Father?" "Dead." He said it flatly, the implication enough to stun me. I could sense the confused whirl of his emotions for just a brief moment before he blocked me out. "The monster has been slain. Our concern now must remain only for the living." Something touched my back, searing my skin, and I convulsed, screaming, everything else lost from my mind. Lanya's golden touch surrounded me, trying to shield me. I felt ashamed, knowing I should be the one protecting her, but I couldn't focus my thoughts enough to even try. Burning, and I screamed again. It seemed all my world was agony. I whimpered, helpless, my cries hoarse and pitiful as the pieces of my shirt were pulled from tattered flesh. Something cool was pressed to my lips. A few drops of heavenly liquid splashed onto my tongue. It tasted of poppies and starlight, warming me, calming me, making me forget my hurt and my heartache. I smiled, the pain receding, and opened my eyes to stare up at Lanya, her hair a golden halo in the firelight. What was that? The potion the crone used to give Father. She only gave you a small amount for the pain. The potion. Something was wrong. I could feel it, beneath the clouds spinning through my mind. Something I had forgotten, something terrible. The awful price of drinking a potion to forget. Krissa? I heard her concern, worried for the strain in my mind as my emotions overflowed into her. What had I forgotten? It was so important. Krissa, it's all right. The potion Father took. The crone's eyes, guilt-stricken. Will you honor our arrangement, Malachi? I thrashed, reaching out blindly. Someone spoke sharply, their words incomprehensible, their meaning clear. It did not matter. My hand caught the wrist of the crone, and, without knowing how I was able, I forced myself inside her mind. She had never trained to shield her thoughts as we had, and so she was unable to prevent my abrupt intrusion into her disturbing secrets. I found her sadness for the death of Malachi, and Janice, and my mother, and many more, a long list of ghosts she grieved for, cursing the gods for taking them. Twining through that grief, subtle and treacherous, was her fear of death, of Caerlissa, of Sirius and all that came with the ending of her life. I followed that fear and found darkness. She had sought out the shades of the fallen elder gods, those corrupted, wicked beings whose mere mention was blasphemy, and had offered them worship in acts so profane I thought I would go mad from mere knowledge of them. And, in return, they had offered her what she wanted most, at the cost of her soul: immortality. Life is fragile, Wild Rose. Since my mother's death, I had come to think of my father as evil. The violence, the hate, the uncontrolled rage were all, in my innocence, a sign of it. But in the crone's mind, I at last learned the truth. Evil did not wear my father's face. It wore the crone's. She had murdered our mother. She had made the choice shortly after the twins were born. She needed them to fulfill the requirements of the elder gods, one to serve as a vessel for her spirit, the other to feed it, and thus gain her immortality. She had intended to take Kylie's body for her own, trapped at the moment it was filled with youth, her 16th birthday, and then devour Elixir to sustain it. She had known our mother would not be able to resist her vision of a sixth child, a slip of her hand during Rhys's birth, and our mother had died when she might have lived. It was there, in her mind, the knowledge that Adelaide had not been beyond saving, despite what Janice and I had believed. It had been a simple thing, then, to feed Malachi the potions. Katakasha, she called it, the vile drug which had created both his apathy and his cruelty. She had nurtured his addiction until he could no longer care for us, and gladly traded my brother and sister for its darkness. I fought through my horror to find my rage, tearing through the crone's mind. I cared nothing for her guilt or fear or regret, thinking only of my family. I would rip these memories from her, take her mind from her, and leave her hollow and empty and alone, unable to hurt any of us ever again. I would destroy her. Lanya. I could scarcely breathe as the images of horror and atrocity passed through me. I felt the crone's overwhelming fear of her mortality, experienced Krissa's unfiltered hatred as if it were my own. The idea of my siblings being tortured, murdered, and worse, clawed at my sanity. I couldn't stand the pain, my sister's rabid madness filling me with agony. I would do anything to make it end, to be free of the panic and terror that left me weak and frozen. The knife was still in my hand, and I stared at it as if it were held by a stranger. I had to end Chris's suffering. Chrissa. The crone's mind was dark and jumbled, and I lashed out at it, wanting viciously to cause her as much pain as she had brought us. I would strip her of even the knowledge of her name. When I was done, death would seem like a blessing. Her thoughts froze, going suddenly dim, fading, pulling me down towards something final and frightening. I jerked back inside myself, my ears ringing in the abrupt quiet. The hands that had held me were gone, and I twisted, pushing myself up, ignoring my agony. The crone gaped at me, blood pouring from her throat. Her hands were coated with it as she tried, desperately and futilely, to hold in her life as her knees buckled. She fell to the floor, her chest rising once, and then falling, to rise no more. I looked up at Lanya. Her face was bone white, her eyes glassy and wild as blood dripped from her hands. There are times when we truly believe that if we do not speak of something, then we can pretend for a while that it did not happen, and live in the illusion that the harsh, ugly reality is not real, but merely a dream. Which is why, for a long, long time, we simply sat in that room, staring at the crumpled, lifeless body of the crone, and listened to the aching silence.